Part 1. When a bear appeared amid the laughter of children. That afternoon, the sky over the town of Maple Hollow was bathed in a warm golden hue. Like honey, the last rays of sunlight streamed through the red maple leaves, casting dappled patches of light on the damp ground. In the Central Park, the laughter of children echoed through the open air. Shouts and calls rang out. The patter of tiny shoes crunched on the sand, mingling with the creak of swings, forming the familiar melody of a peaceful day. On the sandy playground, a few children were building a castle, its crooked walls and little towers decorated with dried leaves. Farther away, another group jostled for the slide, their cheers rising and falling like waves against a cliff. No one paid attention to the long gusts of wind slipping through the trees at the edge of the forest. No one noticed that in just a few minutes, that peace would be torn apart and replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. It began as a shadow at the edge of vision, a massive dark shape, moving slowly yet with steady purpose, emerging from the old pine trees. At first, only one boy near the low wooden fence saw it. His chatter stopped, his eyes widened, and he instinctively stepped back. Then came the first scream. Like a wave, the scream spread, swallowing up the laughter. The children scattered like sparrows fleeing from a hawk. The bear emerged in full view, an adult black bear, its thick, glossy fur looking as though it had been brushed smooth, its shoulders so high they nearly reached the top of the playground fence. But it was not its size that stunned everyone, it was the way it stood still. No roar, no growl, no sudden charge. It simply stood there, straight-backed, its dark, chestnut-like eyes fixed on a single point on the ground. The adults in the park reacted instinctively, calling the children closer, pulling them away, some fumbling for their phones to call the police or the park rangers. Even as the distance between the bear and the children grew, no one dared to turn their back fully on it. There was something off. The wind picked up, making the empty swing sway with a squeak. The sound of the wind mingled with another, the sound of a great living creature standing before them. The bear's breathing was slow, deep, and heavy, like ocean waves striking against rocky cliffs. Each time it inhaled, its massive chest swelled, then fell, but its eyes never shifted from that corner of the playground. That spot seemed ordinary enough, a square patch of sand under the shade of an old oak tree, where children often buried toys or searched for glittering pebbles. Yet now, it felt like the center of a secret only the bear knew. It was not watching the people, nor drawn to the scent of snack crumbs scattered nearby. Its gaze, slow, steady, almost contemplative, was locked on that patch of sand, as if something far more important than survival lay buried there. A few braver men took cautious steps forward, shouting or tossing pebbles in hopes of scaring it off. But the bear did not move. It only tilted its head slightly, as though listening to a voice calling from far away, a voice only it could hear. Then the strangest moment happened. A little girl, about 4 years old, clutching a rag doll, slipped from her mother's arms and toddled toward the corner of the playground. The entire park seemed to hold its breath, yet the bear remained still. Only when the mother rushed forward and scooped her daughter up did the bear's eyes blink, a slow, heavy blink, almost like a sorrowful acknowledgement. No one understood what was happening, but everyone could feel an unusual stillness, a silence heavy with the scent of damp earth, of time, and of things long buried. The question began to pass from one anxious glance to another. What could lie beneath that sand that would make a bear stand guard for hours, unmoving, as if protecting a secret that had slept for decades? Part 2. A glimpse through time. Ethan Mallory never thought he would return to Maple Hollow for more than a few hours. He had left the town over 20 years ago, living in a city hundreds of miles away, where car horns and streetlights drowned out all childhood memories. But today, he came back only to take his 6-year-old niece, Emily, to the park. It was an unplanned trip, simply because Emily's mother, his younger sister, had to work a night shift at the hospital. Ethan stood under the shade of the oak tree, arms crossed, eyes following Emily as she played on the slide. He barely noticed the murmurs from a group of parents nearby until one man muttered hoarsely, as if his breath had been cut in half, "Bear, black bear." He turned, and the sight hit him, the massive bear, standing just beyond the wooden fence, perfectly still, The evening light made its fur gleam with a deep blue sheen. Its shoulders curved like ancient boulders. No one needed to tell Ethan this was not a common sight in a quiet town like Maple Hollow. His first reflex was to find Emily. She was far enough from the bear, but still close enough to make his chest tighten. Ethan dashed forward, pulling her toward him. He braced himself in case the bear charged, but it did not. It simply stood, staring at the sand. At first, Ethan thought it was looking for food. Maybe the smell of cookies or potato chips left on the ground had drawn it here. But as he came closer, he noticed something strange. Its head was slightly lowered, its neck taut, its eyes locked on a single point, not shifting even when a few children screamed. When Ethan was about 10 feet away, he saw more clearly. The sand in the corner of the playground had been disturbed, and within it, a piece of wood was sticking out. It was part of something square, the edges worn down, the surface mottled with green moss. Faint carvings circled its edges, patterns nearly erased by time. Ethan narrowed his eyes. This was not a child's toy. It was bigger than a lunchbox, and the smell of damp wood and old earth rose faintly from it, stirring the feeling in him both familiar and distant. He crouched down, reaching out to touch it, but stopped when the bear blinked. It was not a threatening look, nor a warning. It was more like an admission that he had seen what it was guarding. Ethan swallowed hard. In that instant, a ripple of unease ran through him, not because of the bear, but because of the box. Something in its shape, in its color, brought back the stories his mother used to tell him as a child, stories of a disappearance that had happened right here in this playground. Decades ago. He crouched lower, studying it. On the wooden surface, near the corner that stuck out of the sand, there was a fresh scratch, thin and sharp, as if made by a metal object prying at it not long ago. This was not the work of time, but of a recent attempt. Someone had tried to open this box. A chill crept down Ethan's spine. He looked up, meeting the bear's gaze once more. In those deep, dark eyes, he saw more than the instincts of a wild creature. There was something older, steadier, as if it had been standing here long before he was born and would remain until the secret was revealed. Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Ethan, is the bear sad?" He did not know what to say. He only pulled her closer, then stood, feeling something shifting inside him. This was not just an encounter between man and animal. This was a glimpse through time, and he was already being drawn into it, without yet knowing why. Part 3. Footprints leading back to the past. In the days that followed, Maple Hollow felt as though it had been placed beneath a sheet of glass. Life went on. People still moved about, but their eyes often drifted toward the park, the place where the story of the bear that stood motionless for hours had become the town's main topic of conversation. The police and park rangers had come, trying to drive it back into the forest. They'd tossed flares, made loud noises, even sprayed a light mist of tear gas from a distance, but the bear would only step back a few paces, then return the next day to the exact same spot, standing still as stone. Rumors began to spread. Perhaps it was injured, or had lost its cubs, or was waiting for someone. Ethan, unlike in those first days, no longer tried to keep his distance. He began visiting the park every afternoon after picking up Emily from school. And each time, he found it there, unmoving, eyes still locked on that patch of sand beneath the oak tree. What unsettled him was not its presence, but the feeling that he and the bear were sharing a secret, one he did not yet understand. On Tuesday night, he decided to stay at the park late. The night air carried the damp chill of the northern forest. The yellow glow of the street lamps stretched long shadows across the sand. The bear did not come. Ethan sat patiently on a wooden bench, watching the clock. 9 o'clock, 9:30. Just as he began to think he had been mistaken, the massive shape appeared at the forest's edge, moving slowly into the playground. But this time, it did not walk straight to the sand. It stood still for a moment, then turned away, heading toward the forest. Ethan noticed something strange. It looked back at him, its gaze not fierce but almost inviting. Before he could think, he was on his feet, following. The darkness of the forest was thick as ink. With each step, Ethan had to strain his eyes to make out the narrow path winding between ancient tree trunks. On the damp ground, the bear's footprints were clear, deep, and wide, but then, after a few dozen yards, They merged with other tracks, smaller, warped by time, but still recognizable as human shoe prints. The shoes had been there so long that decaying leaves and creeping roots had invaded the edges. Yet the depressions remained deep. He followed them, feeling as if he were stepping into another layer of memory. The forest smelled changed, no longer only pine and damp earth, but with a faint, acrid scent of old burned wood. And then he saw it, a massive tree stump, split in half, its trunk blackened as if struck by lightning many years ago. The charred marks had faded to gray, but the twisted grain of the wood still carried an uneasy presence. Beside the stump, under a layer of dry leaves, something protruded. Ethan crouched down and pulled it from the earth. It was a child's shoe, the leather faded to a dull gray. The laces frayed, but its shape still intact. His heart pounded. He turned it over, and on the sole, a clump of dried earth clung stubbornly, cracked like ceramic glaze. As he held the shoe, the beam from his phone's flashlight caught on something else, wedged deeper in the roots. He brushed away leaves and soil, revealing a crumpled scrap of paper, smeared with mud. It was a black and white photograph, torn in half lengthwise. In it, two children stood side by side, grinning brightly. One was a blonde-haired boy, about 8 years old, the other shorter, with messy dark hair and bright eyes. On the back, in faded ballpoint pen, were the words, "Forever Together 1974. Ethan froze. He knew this photograph, not this exact copy, but those faces. They stirred hazy memories from the stories he had heard as a child. 1974, the year a boy from the town vanished without a trace. A case the adults rarely spoke of, and when they did, their voices always softened. A strong gust rustled the leaves, making the photo tremble in his hand. The bear was only a few yards away, not advancing, not leaving. Its gaze was the same as on that first night in the park, not that of a predator, but of a witness, a guardian. Ethan felt his blood begin to race. The old question rose again, but now with a heavier weight, the old box in the sand. The child's shoe, the photograph with its promise of forever together. How were they connected to that long unsolved disappearance? And why had the bear led him here? In the darkness, the sound of its breathing was slow and deep, as if reminding him that every answer lay right beneath his feet, if only he had the courage to dig them up. Part 4. The Secret Beneath the Sand. The next morning, Maple Hollow lay under a thin veil of mist, the sun hidden as if trying to conceal something. Ethan stood at the window of his sister's living room, looking out at the empty street. Since finding the shoe in the photograph the night before, he had not slept. Everything felt like a vortex, pulling him back into pieces of memory he had long left buried in the dark. He remembered that as a child, his older brother, Michael, often took him to the park's playground. There was another boy who sometimes played with them, named Daniel. One day, Daniel disappeared. Their mother said he had wandered into the forest, but no body was ever found. Michael was 12 then. He came home late that day, silent for days afterward, and slowly, people stopped mentioning Daniel. 5 years later, Michael died in a warehouse fire on the outskirts of town. Now, the box in the sand, the shoe, and the photograph all struck directly at that memory. And the bear, for some reason, had patiently guarded that spot day after day, as if waiting for the right person to dig it up. Ethan knew that if he did not act, the secret would remain buried forever. That afternoon, he returned to the park with a shovel. Most of the children had gone home, leaving only a few adults watching from a distance, eyeing him and the bear with puzzled expressions. It still stood there, its shadow long across the sand, eyes fixed on the familiar spot. Ethan stepped to the fence, feeling as though he were trespassing on sacred ground. When he pressed the shovel's blade into the sand, the bear merely shifted to the side, as if making room. The faint clang of metal meeting earth rang out, each stroke making his heart pound harder. The soft sand gave way to damp soil, and the scent of rotting wood began to rise. Then, at last, the wooden box emerged in full. Ethan knelt, brushing away the dirt clinging to its edges. The box was larger than he had expected, heavy and solid, fastened with rusted metal clasps. Using the tip of the shovel, he pried them open one by one, each dry clack echoing in the stillness. The bear remained silent, unblinking. The lid creaked open, and Ethan froze. Inside was no treasure, no ancient relic, but a collection of personal belongings, arranged neatly like a miniature shrine. A leather cord necklace with a small blue stone pendant, a leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed, the handwriting small and precise, and at the very bottom, a folded slip of paper, placed with care as though afraid it might tear. Ethan unfolded it. The handwriting was so familiar it made his throat tighten. Michael's handwriting, without a doubt. The short line stabbed straight into his chest. "I am sorry I could not protect you." The paper slipped from his fingers, falling into the sand. The images of that day surged back like a film in reverse. Michael and Daniel playing, laughter ringing out, then a scream, the rustle of forest leaves, and Michael carrying his younger brother home, eyes red and wet. He had never asked questions. He had been too young to understand. But now, the pieces were falling into place, forming a dark picture. He opened the notebook. On the first page was Daniel's handwriting, August 12, 1974. "Today Michael and I buried the treasure box in the playground. Michael promised no one would find it but us." The following pages were childish notes about games and small dreams, until the last page, which held only one hurried sentence, the letters shaky. "I'm scared, someone is watching." Ethan closed the notebook, his eyes blurring. Michael must have witnessed something terrible on the day Daniel vanished. Perhaps he had tried to protect his friend, but failed. Perhaps that truth was the burden he carried for the rest of his life. Until the fire claimed him, a gust of wind swept through, and Ethan looked up. The bear still stood there, its deep black eyes reflecting the fading light. For a fleeting moment, he felt it understood everything, that it knew who had buried the box. And why. Perhaps it had been standing watch for Daniel, for Michael, or for both. Ethan cradled the box in his arms, feeling as if he were holding a piece of his own memory. He had no doubt now, the secret had been buried for decades, and it was time to bring it into the light, but he also knew that by doing so, the past would no longer sleep. Part 5. The Keeper of Memories. Ethan sat on the long bench beneath the porch, the wooden box resting on his knees. That morning, he had handed it over to the town police. They promised to reopen the investigation into the 1974 disappearance. But he knew that time had washed away almost every trace of evidence. Even so, the existence of the box and its contents was undeniable, a tangible fragment of memory. Proof that the story had truly happened. When he stepped out of the police station, he looked up to see the sky over Maple Hollow clear and bright, with white clouds drifting slowly like lost ships. But he did not see the bear. For the first time in many days, the patch of sand beneath the oak was empty, marked only by deep footprints pressed into the sand like engravings left by time. People in town said that early that morning, someone had seen it leaving the park, walking straight into the northern forest. It had not looked back. It had not stopped. It had simply vanished into the trees, as if its task had been completed. That afternoon, Ethan returned to the park. He stood alone before the oak tree, where the sand had been smoothed over. Children ran and played, their laughter ringing out. None of them knew that only a few days earlier, right on this spot, a 40-year-old secret had been unearthed. He sat down, his hand unconsciously brushing the sand. Its cool, fine texture carried him back to distant afternoons when he and Michael played at burying treasure. Back then, he had not understood why Michael always glanced around, or why his brother's eyes sometimes grew distant and adult-like. Now he knew. Michael had not just buried a box. He had buried a part of his memory, a part of the truth he could never speak aloud. Ethan gave a faint, sorrowful smile. How long had the bear stood here? 1 season, 1 year, or had it returned from time to time over decades? A silent gatekeeper, he could not know, but he believed, somehow, that it had sensed the presence of this memory, and had waited for the right moment for a human to find it. As he left the park, he turned back. The wind from the northern forest swept in, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. For an instant, he thought he saw, among the far-off treetops, a massive black silhouette standing still before slowly turning away. Perhaps it was only an illusion, or perhaps he did not seek an answer. Some mysteries, like memories, need no explanation. What mattered was the lightness he now felt, as if a door had closed without a final creak. But one question still lingered quietly within him. How had the bear known the box was there? Whom had it been guarding? The child who disappeared, the brother who was gone, or his own past? Part 6. Empathy Beyond Species. After handing the box to the police, life in Maple Hollow gradually returned to its usual rhythm. The sand beneath the oak tree once again rang with children's laughter. But in Ethan's heart, everything had changed. He knew that a chapter of the past had been closed, not with an explanation, but with the recovery of a lost fragment of memory. The bear had vanished from that day on. People said it had returned to the northern forest, choosing a quiet valley for the coming autumn. But to Ethan, it was never just a wild animal. It was a silent witness, a gatekeeper for a promise that had been buried for decades. One late afternoon, Emily found a long black hair and asked, "Do you think the bear knew who Daniel was?" Ethan smiled. "I think it knew enough to stand there." A simple answer, but for him, it carried the full weight of the story. He understood that empathy does not require a shared language. Sometimes, it is simply the act of being in the right place, at the right time, to protect something fragile from being forgotten. The bear had done that, for days on end, until a human had the courage to bend down and lift the secret into the light. The final image remained in his mind, the massive black figure at the edge of the forest, glancing back once before melting into the shadows. It was not a farewell, but a confirmation. The mission was complete. The memory had a new guardian, and promises, though once buried, could still find their way home.